starting with the quarterbacks, who are we looking to add that might be available?
Yeah, there's not a lot. Anthony Richardson, I know he wasn't good last week, but we kind of knew he wasn't going to be good last week against Denver. But this week he's got Tennessee. So the matchup's good. Aaron Rodgers, I told you to pick him up last week. He had a massive game against the Jaguars. Him and Devontae Adams are clicking on all cylinders right now, and they've got the Rams. That could be a high-scoring game. Match up a couple of old gunslingers between him and Stafford. Stafford's another player that if he's out there, you may want to go out and pick him up. He's actually been – I know he had a bad game last week, but that was everybody, it seemed, except for Puka Nacua. But he had scored 18-plus in 3 of his previous 4. And again, I think that could be a high-scoring game against the Jets. If Patrick Mahomes cannot play against the Texans, then you could add Carson Wentz if you're in a super flex league or really desperate for a quarterback. And then finally, I hate to say it, but Cooper Rush had 3 touchdowns last week, and they're playing the Bucs. So, I mean, I guess you could. I can't see anybody needing to play Cooper Rush in the fantasy semifinals, but at this point, but I mean,
here's what I think is what's realistic is that some people are probably going to be looking at, let's say have Russell Wilson. Let's say Russell Wilson does not have George Pickens back this Saturday, as we talked about earlier. So is there anyone that's realistically available in the league where one is playing Russell Wilson that you would actually think of swapping in for Russell Wilson? Or are you just like,
no,
bummer?
I'd play Anthony Richardson and Aaron Rodgers over him this week.
Okay.
And Matthew Stafford, I would play over him.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see if they're available. What about the running backs? This
is
an interesting week for running backs, at least. Yeah. We're waiting on some injury updates.
I don't ever put anyone who's owned in, 65 or more in terms of the percentages on those 3 major platforms. So
I understand, they're out there. Still, Anthony Richardson and Aaron Rodgers are unlikely to be available in my leagues. I understand what you're saying, but I think it's unlikely in a league where you are actually looking for a replacement. In the leagues that they're available on the waiver wire, probably smaller leagues where people have reason. We didn't suffer any major injuries to fantasy assets, except for maybe Mahomes. You're taking him out. I don't know. It feels borderline.
None of those 3 platforms has Aaron Rodgers owned in more than 43.8%. So I think he's out there, and Stafford will be out there too. Running back Jerome Ford is going to be out there because he had gotten cut. He hadn't been doing much. I looked across all the platforms. He is 42% owned on the high end on Sleeper and Yahoo. And I actually love the matchup this week against Cincinnati. Jerome Ford is a pick him up and start him player. And that's really hard to find in week 16. So if you've got fab budget left, if you've got priority, get him. Because Nick Chubb is not going to be back this season. I don't know what the status of Alvin Kamara is. We might not know for a while. They play on Monday night. But Kendre Miller would be the pivot. It's not a great matchup against Green Bay, but still, if Kamara can't go, then Miller would be the next man up. Tajay Spears had a big game this past week. Tony Pollard is banged up. He's been dealing with the foot. They've got the Colts. Good matchup. And then from last night, Alexander Madison or Amir Abdullah. If Sincere McCormick is not going to be back, then that's the duo you're going to have. And I'd probably prefer Madison over Amir Abdullah, despite what happened last night. But both guys are clearly in the mix.
Wide receivers.
Yeah, there's a handful. Quentin Johnston is still available in a lot of leagues, and he's had 2 games with 15 or more fantasy points in a row. Denver coming up. That's the Thursday night game. Romeo Doubs was very good at a couple of touchdowns last week. New Orleans on Monday night. Good matchup. Adam Thielen, even though he wasn't as good as we were kind of hoping, he still had 5 catches against the Cowboys. And the matchup's not great against the Cardinals this week, but again, a guy that you could pick up and maybe potentially stash if you need him. Rashad Bateman had a big game last week. They've got the Steelers coming up. The Steelers just gave up 20-point games to not only A.J. Brown, but also Devontae Smith. So Bateman is also worth an ad. Keon Coleman, also worth a look. Now, again, guys, most of these players you're not picking up and starting at these positions, at least. But they are good for depth purposes. You never know what's going to happen. Somebody goes down, etc.
Not interested in Jalen Coker, who had 6 targets, 4 catches, 110 yards, and a touchdown for the Panthers.
Yeah, but most of it came on one play. An
83-yarder.
Yeah, I'm going to pass on that one. Yeah.
All right. Fair enough. What about tight end?
I'm surprised that Pat Frymuth is still out there in as many leagues as he is. Now, this week they've got Baltimore, and we don't know if George Pickens is going to be back or not. But regardless, tight end's thin. And Frymuth has been pretty good for the better part of last month. So I'm surprised he's still out there. And my favorite guy, Brenton Strange. And they've got the Raiders this week. That's a good matchup, like a really good matchup. Brenton Strange is somebody that I can see picking up and starting this week. Honest to God, I like him.
Yeah.
And honestly, if you have him in Dynasty, that might be a little gem. Because who knows how long Evan Ingram is going to be around in Jacksonville, right? He's 30 years old. So Brenton Strange is somebody to go. I know it's not old, but
I know, it's just crazy.
He makes a lot of money, and they got a kid here who's shown some flashes. So Brenton Strange is also somebody to go out and grab at tight end. Tight end's very, very thin, as I said, and there's not much on the waiver wire that actually would tell you to pick up and play this week.